FADIC offers a variety of international online trainings accredited by FADIC and provided by well-reputed professionals in the field, which means that you can always keep up with the latest topics in your specialty wherever you are and whenever you need it.
Well, it's a pleasure for me to be able to give this presentation so far away. The title is Principle-Centered Leadership. We'll talk a little about pharmacy, but not very much, because it mainly relates to each of us as an individual, as a person. So the first slide just kind of defines the difference between management and leadership. And I put this slide in here because I think sometimes we don't understand the difference. And I didn't for a long, long time in my career. But leadership is basically deals with direction. It deals with doing the right things, effectiveness. It's based on principles. And you ask yourself the question, is the ladder on the right wall? Are we doing the right things? And management is based on the process to get to where leadership wants to go. So you have to do you have to do things right. You have to be efficient. You have to be fast. And management does not like change, and leadership, that's what change is all about. It's about moving from one place to another, and then management is the process for getting there. And in the second slide, you see that some of the functions that occur between leadership and management are, the functions are on the left-hand side there, where it says creating the agenda, human services, execution, outcomes. Well, let's take the first one, creating the agenda. Management would plan and budget, but leadership is the direction, the path that the organization's going on. Human resources, well, management would do the staffing and the organizing, and they'd pay the people and hire the people, but leadership's responsibility would be to align the people to the vision of the organization. The execution, leadership motivates, inspires. They want to empower. They want people to make decisions on their own through inspiration. But management is more of a controlling and problem-solving approach. And then outcomes, you'll notice that management does not want change. They want things to be predictable. They want order. And realistically, you cannot change the computer system every week or the payroll system very frequently. So most management systems are in place for a while, but leadership is constantly thinking about how can we be better, where can we go, where do we have to be. In the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about how we came up with principle-centered leadership. I think success in leadership is dependent on obedience to principles and personal character. And I personally think it's 80 to 90% of success. Technique and personality, those things are all very important, but if you notice the iceberg there, if you took the bottom part of the iceberg away, the techniques and personality would just be floating kind of randomly on the water surface. But the principles and character anchor the managers or the leaders' behavior, and therefore that strengthens their ability to lead. And I want to talk a little bit about principles, because I think, at least in the English language, the number one word, I think, is obedience. People need to be obedient to principles, and we do it all the time. We're obedient to scientific laws. We're obedient to gravity. We're obedient to the laws of electricity. We don't touch hot wires or else we might die. We don't jump off cliffs or we might be killed. And so we're obedient to all those principles. And scientists, when they discover principles, they're obedient to them, and then they get the results they wanted. When Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, he had 1,000 failures, but when he finally discovered how to make the little filament that goes in the light bulb correctly, then he stayed obedient to that principle, and he continued to improve upon it over time. But he was obedient to what he discovered, and he was successful. Now, if there are laws that are to which we are obedient that relate to science, then maybe there are laws that relate to our interpersonal relations. And one of those laws would be the law of the farm. We plant in the spring, we harvest in the fall. And if you plant in August, you won't harvest in October. It just doesn't work. That law applies to other things. It applies to learning. You cannot cram learning. I'm trying to learn how to be a photographer now, and I want to get there really fast, but that's not how it works. You have to read and read and read and read and practice and practice and practice, and finally you might get good. You might get better. So it's the same with learning. We want to grasp it quickly, but we can't. If we try to lose weight, it's a pound a week or 2 pounds a week, and that's the best that we can do. If we want to run a marathon, we have to practice, we have to exercise, we have to get in shape, and it takes time, multiple weeks of exercising and getting our bodies in shape to run a marathon. So those are laws. And we have to be obedient to it. Of course, we can run a marathon without being in shape, but we suffer the consequences. And that's what the next slide says. It says, all human behavior is principle-centered. And we can choose how we respond, but we can't choose the consequences. Someone told me once, well, in a sense, you do choose the consequences because you chose your choice because you knew what the consequences were. And that may be the case. But if we choose to run a marathon without being in shape, then the consequences are we're not going to do it very well. We might make it 2 or 3 miles, and then we're going to probably quit the race. So that it says there that we can choose our actions, but we cannot choose the consequences. The consequences that flow from our actions are governed by principles. Another principle is trust. And here I want to talk a little about healthcare and how this principle of trust relates between the individuals that work on a healthcare team. Trust, according to Stephen Covey, his definition is it equals trustworthiness plus positive relationships. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that trustworthiness equals character, our integrity, our maturity, plus competence. In other words, our technical competence, our conceptual competence, our interpersonal skills. So that the most important part, we have to have the character. And oftentimes that's assumed until we do something that destroys people's perceptions of our character. And then competence. We have to continuously be competent. We have to continuously try to get better. And that produces the trustworthiness, which is an individual trait. But trust is an interpersonal trait, and that requires relationships. And that's why we need to work hard on the relationships we have with the doctors and with the nurses and with the occupational therapists and the physical therapists, and because we work as a team, and we have to have trust between the members, and that comes from our character, our competence, and then finally working on interpersonal relationships. In the next slide, you'll see, in the next 2 slides, you see a couple of quick quotes. Compelling trust is the highest form of human motivation. And then someone once said, principles rule, we don't. And I think that's true. We have to be obedient to these principles in our life. And if we are, our chances of success will be increased. The next slide is a quote from Albert Einstein, which says, the significant problems we face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking we were at when we create them. In other words, we have to start thinking differently. And that's what we're going to do in the remainder of this little short presentation. The next slide says personal change must precede organizational change, and personal quality must precede organizational quality or change. And I think that's true because organizations are made up of us, the people. And the quality of the people will determine the success of the organization. Now the next slide is very busy, and I want to kind of go through it quickly, and hopefully it will make some sense. You notice there are 3 bars, or 3 little rectangles that have the words dependence, independence, and interdependence in it. We're going to start at the bottom with dependence. So that means I am dependent on you. I mean, you're responsible for making me better. I'm not responsible, you are. And a lot of people in the world are dependent. They expect others to do things for them. And of course, an infant is dependent on their parents. And as we get older, so sometimes then we become dependent on others to take care of us. But in the middle part of our years, we should not be dependent. We should be independent. And how you get to be independent is you use the first three of these habits that Stephen Covey didn't come up with or originate, but he put them in an order that created some meaning. The first habit is be proactive, and that means I am responsible for my life. No one else is. I am responsible. Yes, other people can influence it, and they can be part of the problem, but I am responsible for changing how I am and how I relate to the problems around me. So, in other words, you could say, I am the programmer. Habit 2 says, where am I going? So you begin with the end in mind. It's the habit of personal leadership. A lot of people don't think about the fact that they need to lead their lives. In other words, where am I going? Where am I going to be in 5 years? Where am I going to be in 10 years? Where will I be tomorrow? That's the habit 2. The habit of personal leadership. Begin with the end in mind. Know where you're going. And you'll notice that comes before management. Both are equally important, but I think you have to know where you're going before you can figure out the process to get there. And that produces habit. People aren't sure where they're going, and some people prioritize their schedule. In other words, they have a schedule of things that they do, and they prioritize that, but it may not be the priorities in their life. So if you're competent at doing habits 1, 2, and 3, and you'll notice it doesn't take anybody else, just you, and that produces a private victory. A private victory, you've all had the feeling that when you got up early in the morning and you exercised and you were successful at doing it, you were proactive, you were responsible, you knew you should do it. In other words, you began with the end in mind, you went out and did it, and then you prioritized it and you scheduled it. And at 6 a.m. you went out and exercised for an hour. And how did you feel when you got back? Well, you felt good. And it wasn't that your body felt better, which it probably did, but it was your head. Your mind and your intellect felt better about yourself. In other words, your self-esteem improved. And the process of living habits 1, 2, and 3 takes you to the next little box. And that's independence, which says, I am responsible for myself. We'll spend most of our time in the few minutes we have talking about those 3 habits, but I want to put those 3 habits into perspective with habits 4, 5, and 6. Habits 4, 5, and 6 move you from an independence to an interdependence. Now, the healthcare team, there's a tremendous amount of interdependence on the healthcare team. Everybody depends on everybody else for the success of the treatment of that patient, at least ideally. Now, so the goal is to move from independence to interdependence, and that really works on interpersonal relationships. And habit 4, which is the root, the foundation of interdependence, is think win-win. And you might even take it further and say think win-win or no deal. In other words, we will agree to disagree on this if we have to. But you won't lose and I won't lose. We'll both come away from this discussion winning. Then habit 5 is seek first to understand, then be understood. Now, this one is really almost the opposite of what most of us do, including myself. We want to be understood. So what do? We talk. We talk, we don't listen. And so as soon as someone is through with their talking, we've been all during that time they're talking, we're planning our response. And but we're not really listening. And so seek first to understand, then be understood. That's the route. That's the process by which we get to a common understanding, is understanding the other person first. And we use this all the time. We use it when we go to a physician. We use it when we go to a lawyer, because we will not accept their advice unless they know that they understand our problem. And it's the same way in interpersonal relations. People will not accept our advice until they know we understand their problem. And So the first goal then would be to listen, to understand the other person first. And then once you've completed habit 5, then habit 6 is synergize, which means produce a response or an outcome to your discussion that's better than either of your ideas were in the first place. Now, most of the time we compromise, which is 1 + 1 equals something less than 2. But if we synergize, we get 1 + 1 equals 3, equals 5, equals 10, equals 100, maybe even more, in a metaphoric sense. And so it's important then to realize that if we really seek a win-win and we really try to understand, it's possible that we could come up with something that's better than my idea or your idea, and we come up with a synergistic solution that we both like and we both feel good about. Now we're interdependent. And that could happen on a healthcare team. The doctor could have one opinion, you as the pharmacist could have another opinion. You try to understand each other, and you come up with a third alternative that you hadn't even thought of before. And that's the excitement, I think, of the process here of moving from independence to interdependence. And finally, habit 7, which is the circle that surrounds this entire diagram, is sharpen the saw. That means that each day we have to take a little time to make ourselves better. The saw is us. And you do that in 4 areas, and we'll get to that as we could go through these habits, just briefly. The first habit there, as you see in the next slide, is be proactive. And if you go to the next slide, there is a definition. It says, the proactive person has the power to choose your own response to whatever happens based upon your values. But the reactive person, they are responding to emotions. I did this yesterday. I responded to emotions, and I noticed that when I was doing it, my mind was cut off to solutions to the problem. And that's what happens every time. You respond on the basis of feelings that are aroused because of conditions. And once you do this, your mind just kind of shuts off all the opportunities that you could have been creative in trying to solve the problem. And we do this all the time. And it's important to realize what is happening when we are reactive. But if you think at the time that you're reactive, you know, I really cannot think of any solutions to this. But when you're proactive, your mind will be open and free, and solutions will flow into your head. But when you're reactive, it just doesn't happen. Now, the next slide says, if you think the problem is out there, that very thought is the problem. That doesn't mean that the problem isn't out there. It just means that your focus for change has to be you, not waiting for the other person to change. If you want someone to love you, you have to love them first. And I've experienced that with neighbors, where I had an ornery neighbor that was not very nice. And so instead of being angry at them, I decided that I just have to kind of be nice to them. And I was very nice to them, and gradually the neighbor came around and we became friends. And so if the focus for change has to be you. That's the proactive person. I am responsible. Now you can tell if you're reactive or if you're proactive by the language you use. And that's the next slide. There is nothing I can do. This is just the way I am. He makes me so mad. And that's an interesting one, because who controls who in this situation? The other person is controlling you. They're making you mad. But you don't have to be mad. You can choose otherwise. As we talked about in this proactive, you can choose how you respond to situations based on your values. They won't allow that. I have to do that. I can't. You don't have to do anything. You choose based on the consequences, as we talked about earlier. And then I think the most classic language of reactive people is if only. If only my spouse was more loving. If only my boss knew where he was going. If only the people would do this, everything would be better. If only I made more money. And in other words, the thing that has to change is out there and not within you. But the proactive person says, let's look at our options. I choose my responses. I control my own feelings. I prefer, I will. So you can see the difference between a reactive person's language and a proactive person's language. Now, the next slide is a quote that I really, really like. Successful people do the things failures don't like to do. They don't like doing them either necessarily, but their dislike is subordinated to their strength of purpose. That's an exciting statement to me, because if I look back on the areas of my life where I could have been more successful, and I wanted to be more successful, it was generally because I didn't like doing it, and my strength of purpose was not strong enough to overcome my dislike. Some people don't exercise because their strength of purpose isn't strong enough to overcome the dislike of exercise. Some people don't lose weight because their strength of purpose is not strong enough because they don't want to quit eating or start exercising. You can apply this to pharmacy, where if we want to be successful and have that trust that is required for us to be capable of advising others about drug care and therapeutics, then we have to study and spend the time, and that's probably what we don't like, but our strength of purpose just has to be strong in those cases. If we move to habit 2, we begin with the end in mind, and I want to skip the slide that has the quote there, and you can read that perhaps later. I want to go to one where you have the 4 little rings. The thing that happens in the beginning with the end in mind is writing a personal mission statement. And I would encourage you to Google on your computers mission statement. And you will get a lot of exercises that you can use to write one. Now, a mission statement is important because it tells you where you're going, the important things in your life. And if you write one in Saudi Arabia, you write one in the United States, you write one in China, you write one in South Africa, Australia, Japan, they all come out pretty much the same because we're all pretty much alike. You'll notice the 4 little circles in the diagram there. To live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. Well, to live stands for the physical needs. We all have those, no matter where we live. To learn stands for the mental needs. We want to continue to learn. We want our minds to develop. We want to develop more intellect. The one up at the top, to love, is the social emotional need. We all have a need to be loved, and we have a need to love others. And finally, to leave a legacy, the spiritual need, we want our lives to have meaning. And so every mission statement that is written all around the world has these 4 little areas in it. I think that's very interesting, and then it's kind of interesting the way they've drawn the diagram is that right in the center, that's the fire that drives you in your life and keeps you going. So this begin with the end in mind, the habit of personal leadership. Go write a personal mission statement. And you can go on the internet and find Franklin Covey. The website has a very, very good template to do that. And I just encourage all of you to go and write a personal mission statement. Now, habit 3 is kind of the most practical of all the 3 of these. Put first things first. And you'll notice that there's a little exercise here. I don't know if we have time to do it, but think about the important things in your life. What are the most important things? And you could write down 5 or 6 of these. And then I'd ask you to prioritize them. And it might be family, it might be work, it might be your children, it could be your religion, it could be a lot of things. It's just peculiar to you, the important things. Now, how do we manage all those important things so that we increase the opportunity to get them done? So let's take a look at this life management matrix in the next slide. You'll notice that the horizontal axis is urgent to not urgent, and the vertical axis is important to not important. So, and we divide it into 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 would be all those things in your life that are important and urgent. Quadrant 2 would be those things in your life which are important but not urgent. And quadrant 3 would be urgent and not important, and quadrant 4 would be not urgent and not important. So if we go to the next slide, we filled it in a little bit. So we have the things that occur in the urgent and important, the crises, the deadlines, the pressing matters, things that have to be done right now. And you see the numbers under there. The bold percentages are what we should be doing. And in studies who have analyzed folks, or analyzed people, they've determined that about 25 to 30% of our time is spent in quadrant 1. Now, quadrant 2 is important but not urgent. So that's planning, that's all relationship building, it's recreation. But most of us only spend about 15% of our time there, where we should be spending 65 to 80. And why? Because it's important, but it doesn't seem to be urgent, and therefore the urgent drives us. And that's where we spend, if we go down to quadrant 3, it's things that appear to be urgent and probably are not important, like email and Facebook and computers and a telephone and all these things that kind of pull us away from the important things. We should only spend about 15% of our time there because it's not important. And probably even the 15% is because we're pulled into it by the sense of urgency. And then, of course, in quadrant 4, you have the time wasters. And that they're not urgent and they aren't important. I think the amount of time I spend there is more than 2 or 3%, but that's what they say the average is. Now, it should be interesting if we look at the next little diagram. It says manage in quadrant 1. We have to do it. It's the quadrant of necessity. It must be done. Quadrant 2, we need to focus more on that quadrant. Spend more time there. Spend more time on these important but not urgent things like relationships and planning and so forth. And then avoid the bottom 2, 3 and 4. Just avoid that. Quadrant 3 is the quadrant of deception. It fools us into thinking it's important. And quadrant 4 is the quadrant of waste. But if you notice, an interesting phenomenon is that if you spend too much time in quadrant 2, it wasn't urgent to start with, and then it no longer is important, and it moves down to quadrant 4. So you could watch a television show and it could be quadrant 2 because you enjoy it and it's recreation. But then if you watch 4 or 5 hours of it, it might become quadrant 4. So that's an individual phenomenon, and you can manage that in your own life. So how do you put this to work? Well, you go to the next slide there and you say, well, we're proactive, we're responsible. We know where we're going because we've written a personal mission statement. We've discovered the roles in our life, which I'll show you mine in the next slide. We've made goals for each of those roles. And then we plan every week, and then we make daily adjustments. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see the roles in my life. I have self. That's how I improve myself. That's relationship to deity. That's exercise, eating right, just taking care of myself. 2 is my spouse. 3 is my kids. I'm a parent. 4 is service, either in my religion, in the town, in the community, in my neighborhood. 4 is work. 5 is work because I have 2 different kinds of work. And then 7 is home maintenance. I have to take care of my house, my yard, my car, all the things I have to take care of. Beyond the 7, it's not really important. I can have hobbies down here. And so you see that I have these roles. Now, if I set goals for each of these roles, and then every week I schedule an activity around making sure I'm better at that role, you'll see the life leadership process. And you'll see over there that you connect to your personal mission statement, you go over your roles, you identify your goals, you create a action activity that is going to work on that goal for the week. Then you organize your week, and you'll notice that now you've got all the important activities for that week scheduled. Now, you may not get them all done. You may get 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, maybe even only 7 out of 10. but it will probably be 4 or 5 more than you would have gotten if you hadn't have organized your week. And when I ask people how many people organize their week in a group of about 100 people, maybe 20 will raise their hands. So that means 80 people schedule every day. If you schedule every day, it's like driving your car down the road. If you schedule every week, it's like flying in a helicopter. You can kind of see ahead of yourself a little ways. If you're flying at 30,000 feet, that's like scheduling every month. It's too high. You just can't see the detail. So scheduling every week, and then having the integrity to do what you say you're going to do. And then you evaluate and you repeat of intrinsic self-esteem that's been developed by accomplishing goals. I think this sense of self-esteem happens 2 ways in life. One is helping other people, and you always feel good helping other people. And 2, when you accomplish goals consistent with your mission statement. Now, I don't really have time here in the 20 minutes or so that I've been allotted to talk very much about habits 4, 5, and 6. But if you purchase Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he spends a lot of time on developing these interpersonal skills of thinking win-win. That has to be your way of being. I don't want the other person to ever lose. I want them to win. At the same time, I want to win, but they have to win. It's not going to be win and I lose. It's win-win. And then habit 5, seeking first to understand and then be understood. Trying diligently to concentrate on what they're saying and not trying to come back with your response until after they know that you understand what they're saying. And then 5, 6, valuing the differences. Making sure that we value each other's opinions and their beliefs and their orientation, and we then produce a synergistic outcome to our problem. Now, habit 7, sharpening the saw, is a very practical habit. You can do this one without even doing the rest, I suppose. But if you could spend 60 minutes a day in the physical area, the mental area, and the spiritual area. Now, I think it's probably not possible to do exactly 60 minutes. Some days you'll do 2 hours, some day you might do 30 minutes. But exercise, that's what I do. Exercise every day and try to eat healthy. Number 2 is I love to read, and so read. And be patient. So sometimes I will read a page and I'll say to myself, I don't know what I just read, and I have to go back and read it again. And then spiritual, that's specific for you. That could be your faith, it could be scriptures, it could be prayer, it could be music, it could be walking through the woods, it could be meditation. All those things are, but it's specific. It's what you want to do. And in the mental area, that may not be reading. It may be something else that stimulates your mind. Then there's a quote here that's about reading. It says it's an invitation to take time to spend time with someone else somewhere else. That's so profound, and I find that it's so true. And then the other part, the social emotional, you can't put that into a time frame, but that's spending time on the important relationships in your life. And if you go back to that, remember the diagram we had when we talked about personal mission statements? To live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. Well, you're working on all 4 of those areas every day. You're developing your mind, you're working on your physical capabilities, you're working on the relationships, and you're making meaning in other people's lives. And that's what strengthens that, like Stephen Covey calls it, the fire within. I probably call it a sense of intrinsic self-worth. You feel better about yourself. And if you do these 7 habits, then you lead your life. And people who lead their lives make better organizations. And those are the kind of people that you want to hire and bring on board. The final slide here, 7 sources of intrinsic security. I'm sure there's probably more than 7. You could probably come up with 10. But Stephen Covey came up with 7, and the first one was personal integrity. Character, personal character, I think, is the most important thing that one should have in their life. A rich private life, being able to kind of go off by yourself and reflect and meditate and review the important things in your life. Going out in nature, it seems to have an effect on me. If I spend time out there, I feel like I'm not the same person. I'm better. And then education, that's free. You can go to a public library. You can check out books, the internet. Always continue your education. Service, and that's service to others, and maybe even anonymous service. If you've ever noticed, if you've done service for somebody, you've always felt good, but as soon as you've said to somebody that you did it, the feeling went away. And so if you do it anonymously and don't tell anybody, the good feeling will last a long, long time. Family, your extended family, your immediate family, that produces a source of intrinsic security. And finally, sharpening the saw every day. You are the saw, and you don't want that saw to get dull. There was in the 15th century, there was a religious leader who said that he needed to spend an extra half hour on his knees in prayer today because it was going to be a hard day. And that was his way of sharpening the saw. Now, your way may be totally different. And that's okay, because whatever you use to sharpen your saw in these 4 areas, to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy, is I think very, very important to do on an everyday basis. Well, that's all I had, and I'd be willing to answer a question or two if you still have time. I'll just comment while people are thinking about a question. It was not easy for me to learn all this. There's a quote that is that someone said that life is an experience of exploration, and we go through all of our life just exploring, and when we get to the end of life, we come to the place where we started and we know it for the first time. I think that sometimes we say to ourselves, oh, it'd be great if I knew all this stuff in the beginning, but that's not how life is supposed to be. And probably it's supposed to be this way, that we kind of learn as we go along, and as we get older, we get a little wiser, and wouldn't it have been great to be that wise when we were younger? But that's not the way it works. It works the way where we gain experiences, and through that experience we gain wisdom, and that just makes us better people. But it happens as we age. Well, you have to, you have to, in your personal life, you just do the things that we talked about. I mean, I think you're proactive. Your personal life would be in your family, or even yourself. Is that you have to know, you have to lead your life and then manage it. And you have to realize that the responsibility for your life is just you. It's not anybody else. And so that's those first 3 habits that we talked about. And I think if you can get in the habit of being proactive, just sensing I'm responsible, knowing where you're going, write that personal mission statement, and then schedule your priorities every week, then you'll lead your life. Now, I think you kind of do the same thing in an organization. The organization is proactive. It doesn't blame other things for it doesn't blame the outside world for why things are going wrong. They have to change what they're doing, and then you have a direction, you have a vision. Where are you going? And then you figure out what are our priorities in this organization, and you focus on those priorities, and you get those done. And I mean, I've had bosses that they had a vision, but I don't think they understood it. and that they said that they were persistent. They kept with that vision, and 20 years later, it began to bear fruit. So I think you have to be persistent. Once you commit to something or some idea or some process, you'll notice in your life that things will just start to happen that you didn't know were going to happen. And I think that's providence. I think sometimes God helps us in the affairs of our lives. And once we're committed, he says, well, Bob, you're committed. Here's some help. And other people come in and help you. I got a question here. How can we make balance a better life? Well, I think the balance comes in those first three habits. If you'll notice, in each of those roles in your life, you're creating a goal every week. It's like the guy in the carnival who puts the plates on the poles and spins them as they go along. And he keeps them all going. You will notice that there'll be less stress in your life and more balance in your life if you're working on all the important areas: yourself, your family, your community, or maybe church responsibilities, your work, and your home. And if you set goals and you get those goals done every week, the stress from worrying about, well, I'm not getting this done, I'm not getting that done, will be lessened. It won't be as much. And you'll be able to have a better balance in your life because you'll be doing the important things with your family. You'll be doing the important things with your religion. You'll be doing the important things at work. And you realize you can't do everything, but you're doing the best you can. And just the realization that you're doing the best you can and accomplishing these things, I think, decreases stress and improves the balance. Here's a question that came through. How can we help our children to be leaders? That's a great question. And
yes.
I'm not sure I have an answer, but I think if they see in you someone who is making an effort to lead their life, and then as they grow older, you can teach them these same principles. I wish someone had taught me the difference between leadership and management when I was younger, because I was in my first job and my boss came in and told me I was managing the department. I wasn't leading it. I had no idea what he meant. I mean, I know now, but I didn't then. I was probably 30 or 35 years old then. And I think if our children see us as good examples of people who are taking charge in the family. I mean, we get everybody's ideas. We aren't a dictator, but we are leading ourselves, our family, and that they'll see that. And then as they see it, then you can teach those principles to them. And as they go through school, high school, then they join an organization. They become the president of that organization. I would encourage your children to be as active as they can in extracurricular activities in school. Join clubs, play on sports teams, read, play the piano. Just become diversified in as many things as they can that they can manage and balance in their lives. Sometimes I think we overschedule our children, but if you can keep the balance there, then and they see in you an example, I think they'll learn how to be good leaders. And here we go. We got one. Doctor, I really want to get rid of procrastination. Well, that's hard for me too. But I think that's where personal integrity comes. There's a little book that I read recently called Make Your Bed. It's a book written by an admiral in the United States Navy. He was a Navy SEAL. And Navy SEAL training in America is the most rigorous training there is. I mean, if there's 150 men that start, 20 graduate or complete the program. And one of the things that they had to do every morning was make their bed. Now that may be something that you do anyway, but when you see something that needs to be done, you just do it right then. And start with small things, like making your bed. And when you see it made, you'll get a great feeling. And then if you see a dish that's not in the dishwasher, rinse it, put it in the dishwasher. Just start doing little things. And I think the habit of doing the little things will cause you then to begin to do the bigger things, and you won't procrastinate. At least that's been my experience. Here's a person that seeks perfection. And sometimes it is really tedious, and I don't know if it's right. I think we just do the best we can. If you honestly feel like you're doing your best, then whatever comes out of it that's it. We don't have to be perfectionists. Now, there's some things I think that we can be perfect in, but there are other things in our life, depending on our talents and our abilities, that we just can't be. But we can be our best, and if we're our best, then I think we have done all that we're capable of doing, and we shouldn't let it bother us. We should feel good that we have done our best. I don't think anybody expects any more than that. Now, if we're in a job where we just can't do it, then we have to probably change jobs so that we move into a job where we can do our best. And I mean, I can't be an airplane pilot because I can't see well enough. So if I was to take my glasses off, I just can't see well. So the commitment it takes for my goal to be achieved. That's a tough question too. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I think that sometimes the commitment doesn't come when we set the goal. I think sometimes it comes later. We'll set the goal and 2 or 3 weeks will go by and we don't get to it, and then all of a sudden the sense of urgency and the importance of it is there. And then we're committed. I'm starting something new. I'm trying to be a photographer, and so I've committed myself. And I don't know if I've committed strongly enough, but I'm trying to get better at it. And there is a sense of urgency, but it's in the important and not urgent category. It's not critical that I do this, but it's, I think I've made the commitment, and I just have to stick to it. Don't procrastinate. When I think of watching a video on how to take pictures of certain things, I watch the video, and I don't procrastinate it and go do something else. So I think that's important. I think I've run out of about everything I know. Okay.
Thank you, really, Dr. Smith, for being with us today and for being patient to entering the GoToMeeting room. Really, we appreciated your presence with us today in FADIC Talk.
Well, thank you for asking me. It was a pleasure and an honor. I'm good to be connected with Saudi Arabia again. So thank you very, very much.
You are always welcome with us, Dr. Smith.
Okay.
في النهايه يا جماعه انا بشكركم جدا لوجودكم معانا. يا رب كده تكونوا استمتعتوا. يا ريت كل واحد يعني بعد البرزنتيشن ديت يقعد مع نفسه شويه وفعلا يعيد ترتيب اوراقه من جديد، يعني نشوف الحاجات اللي احنا اتكلمنا فيها النهارده، لان بصراحه فعلا مهم جدا لينا كلنا، مش حد معين او مش وظيفه معينه، سواء في اي مكان في اي بوزيشن في اي حاجه، ان هو يعرف يعمل بالانس ما بين البيرسونال وما بين البروفيشنال لايف بتاعته، بيكون ليدنج فعلا في حياته يعني. فيا رب كده يعني، يا رب فعلا يعني توك النهارده يكون يعني اتى ثماره للجميع، ونتمنى فعلا يعني كل واحد كده فعلا يكون يعني بدايه ليه بعد كده ان يحط جولز جديده لنفسه، يحط اهداف لنفسه، وفعلا والله يعني بتفرق والله فعلا جدا جدا يعني. فان شاء الله باذن الله كده نتمنى للجميع ان هو يعني تكون حياته موفقه. يعرف يوفق ما بين الامور المهنيه سواء في مهنه الصيدله او اموره البيرسونال لايف بتاعته. وان شاء الله تكون انطلاقه للجميع باذن الله. ونلتقي بكم دايما على كل خير. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته.
FADIC. Revive your clinical career.